For a few days, I lived with this damned cannibal. I had to endure such terrible torments that God forbid anyone to experience them. This is a truly brutal humiliation of a person. I will try to describe everything in detail now, so that people who see this video would have at least the slightest idea of what creatures can hide in the crowd. That evening was the starting point. He threw me into the room like a naughty puppy and slammed the door with a contented grimace. I hit my shoulder hard against the bed that was standing in the room. It was very dark here. The light from the lamppost from the street couldn't leak into the room because of the dark curtains covering the window from floor to ceiling. The terrible stench in the room made its way even through my constantly stuffy nose. I don't even know how to describe the smell. Firstly, it was very sharp, and secondly, it vaguely resembled the smell of a very old apartment in which an old man died not so long ago and whose corpse had already slowly begun to decompose. My hands were tied very tightly. The old man obviously overdid it with the rope. He wrapped my hands as if he had caught some kind of Superman and not an ordinary student. So I lay there until the morning. He didn't come into the room all this time. I heard his footsteps along the corridor. He was cooking something in the kitchen, singing some song unknown to me. Despite the fact that the house was old and the walls in the apartment were thick, I heard him more than well. Now he seemed to be an extremely strange and creepy man. What a deceptive appearance can be. Recently I considered him a kind peasant who constantly joked and supported me. And now I am in the same apartment with a man who takes pieces of human meat from corpses and eats them. Having replayed this fact in my head, I vomited again. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning when I saw the light go out in the crack of the doorway, and from the far room, I heard the creak of an old spring bed. After a couple of seconds, the noise of the TV and the pleasant voice of the girl telling the news was heard. It was then that I at least tried to move with the help of my unbound legs. Sitting down more or less comfortably next to the bed I hit, I soon felt something tickling my neck from behind. It was an extremely unpleasant and disgusting feeling, especially considering where I was at that moment. Someone was crawling on me, and I tried in every possible way to throw it off by waving my head in different directions. I succeeded, but only what was crawling on me fell down by the collar, and the same nasty feeling was already felt in the lower back. What the hell is that? I began to squirm in a vain attempt to get rid of the tickling, trying to do it as quietly as possible. Suddenly, I accidentally hit a chair standing next to me, and it fell to the floor with a loud noise. I froze, and the unpleasant feeling that I was trying so hard to get rid of already seemed to be a trifle. After all, the light came on in the corridor. The creak of the spring bed was heard again, and heavy, unhurried footsteps on the creaking old floor gradually approached the door. Suddenly, it opened, and the light from the lamp in the hallway reached my already accustomed to the darkness eyes. I squinted and saw him again.
"Could you please be quiet?"
The cannibal asked irritably, but rather politely. "I'm sorry. I did it accidentally."
"Punishment awaits all offenses."
He smiled and came closer to me. During these seconds while he was talking, my eyes more or less got used to the light from the corridor, and I found the cause of the tickling. The first thing that caught my eye was a huge number of maggots swarming in some strange substance, and only then I saw protruding ribs and a half-rotted naked human body. A lump came to my throat. I couldn't say a word. Thank God I had both nostrils blocked, and I didn't feel all these smells spreading all over the room. As it turned out, the worms were just everywhere. On the floor, under the bed, on my clothes, and they were spreading from the decomposing body right next to my face. Still, realizing the hopelessness of my position, I couldn't stand it, You are a sick bastard. What are you doing?
If I were you, I'd be more polite, young man.
He came up to me and sat down, looking straight into my eyes. His heavy gaze made me shiver.
Otherwise, you will die so slowly. Accept this and try to move on, and try to move as little as possible. The muscle should be relaxed. Then the meat will be tender.
Let me go. What is my fault? I muttered, already shedding tears.
I really want to dine. This is your fault, my dear, just like in the fable.
He said, smiling. Isn't there enough food for you in the morgue?
Oh, no, there's still a lot of it. We have a different situation with you. You're a too nosy son of a bitch.
Do you think I will tell someone? Let me go. I beg you. I will be silent as the grave. You'll never see or hear me again.
Tell me at least one reason why I should believe you.
After his words, there was silence. I had nothing to say in response.
Well, that's the answer.
I'll give you the money, I suddenly shouted. How much do you need? I'll find the money.
I don't need money.
Suddenly, he leaned his prickly, unshaven face against mine. I even screamed with fright.
If you stay here with me, no one will look for you anyway. As far as I remember, you told me that you don't have any parents. This is the most important thing. Maybe somebody from the university will look for you. But what questions can there be to me?
He laughed.
Don't you want to eat? You threw up everything here. Your stomach must be completely empty. Wait for it.
No, thank you. I'm not hungry.
Come on, at least taste it. I did my best,
he said, leaving the room. I was sitting there and realized that now he would shove fried human meat into my mouth. The cannibal returned less than a couple of minutes later. In his plate was what he had cut off from the girl in the morgue. He pricked a piece on a fork and held it out to my mouth. I clenched my teeth so hard that my mouth would not open under any circumstances, but a strong blow to the stomach made me cough, and the old moron still forced a few pieces into my mouth. I didn't chew, but spat them out on the floor along with the remnants of vomit. He picked up the meat with the already stuck worms and made me eat it.
Eat it!
I had to chew. I understood that he would still force this human flesh into me.
Well done. Take another piece.
Thanks, I'm full.
Don't you dare lie to me,
he said, cutting off another piece of meat and shoving it into my mouth. I threw up again.
Come on, is it really so disgusting?
He was perplexed. Frankly speaking, it was edible, and to some extent even delicious. But the reason for my disgust and vomiting was the very fact that I had a piece of meat of a dead person in my mouth. The cannibal got to his feet, and he himself began to chew what I hadn't finished. Disgusting slurping and drooling.
The weather is getting worse,
he muttered, looking out the window.
It's going to rain. I don't like the rain.
After these words, he took the plate with the remains of the meat and left the room, slamming the door, then closing it with a lock. I was getting hysterical. I understood that no one would help me. There is also no such miracles as happen in movies when the main character is saved at the very last moment. Terrible thoughts crept into my head. Before my eyes, there was a picture of how other cannibals came to this creature, and they all start cutting me into pieces and cooking and eating right in front of me. I'm still so young. I still have a long life left to live. Why did I foolishly follow him? Would have been better to go home. And that's it. What a fool I am. Tears flowed from my eyes, and I fell on my side, awkwardly laying my head on the old wooden floor, strewn with worms. I had nowhere to run. There was a massive lattice on the window, and the door to the room was locked. I was trapped, and looking at the old clock on the wall, I realized that with each movement of the hand, I have less and less time to live. With these thoughts, I fell asleep, leaning on the bed. I was woken up by the noise coming from the corridor. I raised my head from the cold floor and listened carefully. I had a feeling that 10 people were standing there. Everyone shouted over each other. Everyone was trying to prove something different. The voices and words of those who were shouting in the corridor were extremely unusual. Firstly, it was difficult to make out what they were talking about. Secondly, they seemed to speak some unknown language, and I also caught various defects in their speech. I woke up completely when, through this hubbub, I heard footsteps in the direction of the room. It was still dark here, in large part due to the pitch-black curtains, only in some places. The rays of the sun broke through a little. Even then, I understood what would happen next. Apparently, it was his friends who came, the same cannibals as he was. It was as if I was doused with cold water. My whole body began to tremble with incredible horror. Well, imagine what it's like to sit and understand that very soon, you will be cut into pieces and eaten when it's already too late. I began to strain my brain so as to avoid a terrible fate, but as I've already said, it was too late. I've heard the sound of a key in the lock, and the door creaked open. Mr. Jones was standing in the doorway, and behind him was another scarecrow with a distorted face to the right side, crooked yellow crumbling teeth, and dirty skin, as if he hadn't washed for a couple of decades.
"This is Billy,"
he said to me, clearly hinting at the schmuck behind him. The two of them went into the room, grabbed me by the arms, and put me on my feet. I even didn't understand how it happened that I hit Mr. Jones in the nose. So the old man screamed and fell on his back.
"Oh, you scum!"
he growled, hiding his face. The second one, Billy, was standing and looking at me, then at him with confused eyes. And then suddenly another 5 people came into the room. It was in those seconds that I became so scared that I almost lost consciousness. My legs were weak, and I had to sit down on the bed, where the decomposing corpse still lay.
"What's happened, Rich? Why are you lying down?"
It was heard from the doorway.
"Our food doesn't want to die."
I was on the bed staring at them, and again the scenes of a terrible massacre came into my head. These 5 men looked like real homeless people from the garbage dump. All of them were wearing shabby rags, several sizes larger or smaller. The faces were creepy, as if they got out of some horror movie. Everyone had some defects on their face, if I may say so. Billy had a distorted face. Several people standing next to him had no teeth at all. Well, there were maybe 2 or 3, but no more. One of them didn't have a nose at all. I don't know if it was cut off, but it looked like there were 2 big black holes instead of a nose. Only Mr. Jones was more or less like a human, although after yesterday, I can't call him that. In general, terrible things began after that. They grabbed me by the arms. No matter how I tried to break free, all my attempts were in vain. A few blows to the stomach and one to the head quickly calmed me down, and they no longer led me to the kitchen but dragged me. There was boundless joy and madness on their face. I was dragged by 3 people, but the others were laughing, jumping around like the damn members of some cannibal tribe. They sat me down on a chair and tied my legs tightly.
"Billy, check if the window is closed."
Mr. Jones shouted. It feels like he's the boss here. I still want to live, Lord. I want to live, I muttered, coughing from blows to the stomach. Let me go. I'm begging you. There was no answer. I just saw terrible twisted faces jumping around me and sitting at the table.
"Seal his mouth so that he doesn't yell. You can put a frying pan on the cooker and heat the oven."
I counted the minutes. I tried to pull away, but my hands and feet were tightly tied, and all I could do was fall to the floor. They laughed at me, spat in my face, beat me. I endured all this, but then something began to happen that I couldn't tolerate. They taped my mouth shut, and one of the toothless cannibals cut my clothes with a knife. I closed my eyes, and suddenly an incredible pain shot through my entire body, and I felt a warm liquid flowing in streams through my stomach. The creature cut off a piece of the chest muscle, slowly, with a dull, rusty knife, as if on purpose to cause even more pain. I screamed so much that after a few seconds, I lost my voice, and it turned into a wheeze. The weather let us down, so we didn't manage to roast him on a spit, Billy said to Mr. Jones.
Well, never mind. Shit happens. I think it will be even more comfortable here. That's for sure.
Another cannibal, whose name I don't know, agreed. Soon I felt a piece of meat come off me and went to the frying pan. I was already losing consciousness from the pain shock, but the creatures, mocking me, brought me to my senses, to cut me alive, to hear my muffled grunt. Soon the knife was already stuck in my thigh, and again just an unbearable pain rose from below and hit me right in the head. I tried to scream, but Billy quickly covered my mouth with another piece of tape. This lasted for a long time. They cut me alive. I lost consciousness several times. These creatures prevented me from dying in every possible way, tried to stop the bleeding, and constantly, as I have already said, brought me to my senses. The basin standing on the floor was gradually filled with fresh pieces of meat. One of them immediately washed them under cold water and added various spices as if marinating a barbecue. I was still conscious. I didn't even have the strength to scream anymore. Why don't we? The vile voice of one of them was heard.
Give it to him,
Mr. Jones said, and soon a piece of my own meat was put into my mouth.
Eat it. That's delicious.
Putting his hand on my cut shoulder, one of them spoke. With his other hand, he grabbed my chin and allegedly helped me to chew. They put the marinated meat on a baking sheet and put it into the oven, and I was thrown back to the decomposing corpse on the bed, bloody and wounded. I lay there and felt like the worms crawling in it had already slowly crawled into my wounds. There was nothing I could do about it. There was laughter coming from the kitchen, and the disgusting slurping of those freaks. I just lay there motionless and was slowly facing the end of my life. I knew that they would come in again, take me to the kitchen again, and only then I would need organs, not meat. I lay like this for several more hours, lost and regained consciousness, and at one such moment, trying to turn over on the bed, I slightly ran into some sharp cold object, struggling to feel it with my bound hands. I realized that it was some kind of metal rod, which apparently they forgot to take out of the last decomposed victim. Having cheered up a little, even in such a very difficult situation, I gathered all my strength, took this rod, and began to wait for the next visit of my tormentors.